Greetings, my dear audience. Wherever you are from, I hope you all well. My name is Cheryl Yu from Leader Associates, and I'm your host of today. Welcome to the Impact Live. What is the right strategy to promoting green hydrogen commercialization in Europe? The European hydrogen market has been on a rocket this year, with the Union, member states, and the industry talking collaborative action to invest in hydrogen pilots, trials, and demonstrations. However, to make sustainable hydrogen ready for market use, there are still plenty of gaps spanning technology choices, standards, finance, investment, and a streamlined process for industry-government interactions and knowledge sharing. So how to improve the soil and prepare for the scaling and commercial cases of hydrogen in Europe as we look ahead to 2023. In this time of new and old and new, we therefore designed today's webinar and invite conversations with high-level policymakers and market practitioners, including Ms. Helena Crane from European Commission, Mr. Bart Bibu from Green Hydrogen Partnership, Ms. Iria Basanta from Spain Government, Mexico, and Mr. Jonas Momberg from Green Hydrogen Organization. We look forward to seeing what we can learn from this event today. I sincerely thank you all for your effort. Our webinar is supported by the second Connecting Green Hydrogen Europe 2023 Europe Prime Business Conference, Exhibition, and Tech Forum that dedicated to uniting green hydrogen value chain in Europe and across the globe. The confirmed key players include E.ON, Repsol, Engie, Eurogas, Chad, and so on. Well, a few housekeeping notes before we get everything started. In this webinar, we also warmly welcome interaction between the audience and the guest speakers. If you have any questions and want to ask our guest speakers, please leave your comments in the Q&A box. Our assistants on site will help directly. Now, without further ado, I would like to give the floor to our guests of honor today. Let's invite out our first speaker, Ms. Helena Crane, Head of European Research Policy for Clean Energy Transition, to give the opening address, understanding the EU green hydrogen strategy, priority, and possibility. Let's welcome her.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the invitation. I'm very honored to be here today. I have sent a few slides, but of course, most of the information in the slides, you know it. I would like to recap first the basis, which is the European hydrogen strategy. So next, please. Next slide, please. Could we have the second slide? Yeah, thank you. So the EU hydrogen strategy, that's the first time there was a strategy on hydrogen, and it was based, it was based on the high work which has been done in research and innovation in Europe for hydrogen, but also and more on the Green Deal. You know, this very big approach we have developed with the Commission von der Leyen. This strategy is putting forward a vision for creating a European hydrogen ecosystem. And I insist on the word ecosystem because hydrogen is an enabler, and we have very few of such in our, let's say, physical world. So the strategy is covering all the parts on the value chain, from research to the implementation to the deployment. And it's also is covering the hydrogen value chain itself, meaning production till end use. It includes 20 action points, which were already implemented by the first quarter of 22, because it has become a real policy priority. It was aiming at the beginning to install 6 gigawatts of renewable hydrogen electrolyzer by 2024 and to reach 40 gigawatts by 2030. I insist on this data, and I selected them because one of the clear approach is to use hydrogen as first and foremost a means to store renewable energy. As you know, Europe needs a lot of renewable energy, and renewable energy is difficult to store, especially seasonally. So in addition to batteries, we need to develop highly the storage of hydrogen, and we need to develop, of course, highly the production of hydrogen. And of course, hydrogen, I mean, it's an ecosystem, so it directly leads to have a world dimension. And we cover that mainly through mission innovation, at least for the development of hydrogen. Next, please. So the follow-up of the strategy, there are many actions. I will just recap them. So the first one, of course, is the clean hydrogen joint undertaking, and Mr. Bibok will, who is the executive director of this joint undertaking, will present it after me. So I will be short on it. But it has a budget of 1 billion euros from Horizon Europe, which is matched by the same amount from the private partners. And the private partners are twofold, and they are open. So the GU is built in a very efficient way, I would say. Then the second part is a cooperation with our member states through the European Research Area, which is in fact area, because it's also innovation. In that, there was common work by member states and associated countries, which led to a strategic research and innovation agenda published early this year, and together with a staff working document on the services of the Commission on clean hydrogen. We published a staff working document in January 22. If you are interested, you can have a look. There were many actions foreseen in the staff working document. Among them was to create an observatory, so an ERA, European Research Area of Data and Knowledge, was also to work on skills and to work on technology infrastructure, and last, hydrogen valleys. There was also a fifth part, which is the international dimension through mission innovation. So we are progressively implementing all that. This staff working document was published in January. You can find it on our website. Next, please. I spoke with a staff working document on skills. I mean, we have in research innovation, we have worked a lot on skills, but usually we tend to work more on the skills for researchers and innovators here. We have been trying to cover the needs in skills for implementing an hydrogen economy. It will create, if we succeed in implementing the hydrogen strategy, potentially more than 5 million new jobs. And of course, these new jobs needs new training and new curricula and new trainers, whether they are education needs or training needs, but this is a global approach. And as an implementation of that and of the ERA also, the Erasmus+, which is one of the top highlights of the EU. I'm sorry for my voice, 1 second. Strangely, it's also time for allergies in some cases. So as an implementation, Erasmus+ is funding a 4 years project to reduce the skill gap, and it's called Green Skills for H2, and it's supported by the research partner of the GU and the industry partner of the GU and the education. So it's quite new, and we hope it will disseminate and develop, and we are discussing with the GU about this dissemination. That could be a new European Hydrogen Academy. Next, please. So some challenges. I will not. Yes, I think, wasn't it a fourth slide? But okay, whatever. Yeah, sorry. So in that case, we made a mistake. No problem. I will speak about REPower. REPowerEU followed the war, the opening of the war in Ukraine. And it is very important because mainly REPowerEU is on short term, of course, because we face an emergency in the EU. But REPowerEU is presenting some ways, it's paving the way for the future work on hydrogen, on energy globally, but also on hydrogen. REPowerEU is insisting on, for instance, the issue of linking manufacturing to the research, which is a very important point. It is also speaking about critical steps of value chain, and I think all the countries now, following the COVID, unfortunately, are conscious, have been made aware that the absolute specialization is not always the best solution. If you have a disruption or a crisis, it has a drastic impact, and a very quick one. So we need absolutely to have a look at the critical value and the critical steps of the value chain. So one is linked to manufacturing, research to manufacturing, and in the EU we have a lot of examples to take from the outside. On the second, it is indeed to look at the resources, because our planet has a limited amount of resources, and research can help to increase sustainability and circularity. And this is a top really priority to avoid the next crisis on materials, for instance. The third thing, which is very important in REPower, it is of course to have the sufficient skilled workforce, and that's why we are beginning also to work on skills. And the last point is to deal with standards and regulatory frame. The regulatory frame is very important, not only when it's implemented, but also because it gives the industries visibility in the long term. Industry to develop and invest needs stability. It needs to be sure of what it will get if it invests. And very often systematic or recurring changes in, for instance, the way the markets are organized or the cost of energy, this is very disruptive for the projects of investment of the industry. So we need to take that into account, and the Green Deal and REPower have selected a lot of changes or revisions of some legislative work, legislative actions, whether regulation, directives, but also discussions with member states. And last but not least, also at international level. Hydrogen will be an ecosystem at world level, so it means that the standardization and certification should be also at world level. This is very important. This is even more important because we are not speaking about a single product, we are speaking about an enabler. And an enabler, by definition, is touching a lot of markets. So having an agreement or discussing at world level, at international level, is critical, because otherwise we are at risk that we will limit the potential of hydrogen, which will be sad. We don't have so many opportunities. So that in the standards, I include, of course, the guarantees of origin. And because hydrogen is an enabler, when we develop infrastructures, we should be careful not to limit hydrogen to some sectors or some modes of transport or some industries. We need to look more onwards to the conditions of producing hydrogen. And one of the big priorities we have in research and innovation on hydrogen is to increase the efficiency of the value chain for producing hydrogen, storing and distributing, and also to reduce the cost. Currently, of course, a molecule of gray hydrogen is exactly the same than a molecule of green hydrogen. So the issue is more on the carbon footprint, and it's more at the level of the production, the type of production. In that case, we need to really make green hydrogen or clean hydrogen competitive. And that will be voluntarily at the beginning. There is no other way. But it's a big challenge for research to help on that and arrive to a situation where naturally green hydrogen is competitive and clean hydrogen is competitive. Of course, in parallel, we try to develop other ways of producing hydrogen than electrolysis of water. So to try to sum up in all that, the challenge we see for commercialization of hydrogen, first of all, to improve the efficiency, as I said, because of course, if you go hydrogen, you use electricity to produce hydrogen, then you store hydrogen, then you reuse it for reproducing electricity. It means additional steps, so it should be limited to cases where it is efficient, and it should be efficient. Otherwise, it's better to store electricity. What makes the privilege of hydrogen, in a way, this is its capacity to store in a longer run and better the renewable energy. The second, of course, is reducing the cost of production, and that goes by economies of scales, but also improving the equipment itself and improving the industrial processes, and research works on that. The third is a coming challenge, because if we want to produce more hydrogen, we need to store more hydrogen. And for the moment, this seems to be more and more the weakest point of the chain. The third condition is to really look at cross-sector usages, and in one sector to look at cross applications, not to limit to one specific, because otherwise we lose one of the capacity, one of the enabling role of hydrogen. It's like if I would say, for instance, electricity is only good for putting light in my office or in my housing. No, electricity is used in industry also. Electricity could be used in transport. So we have to be a little bit thinking larger, let's say. Then we need to develop the relevant infrastructures. We just quoted here multimodal refueling stations, not limited to a certain mode, but it's also the case, develop, for instance, infrastructures which are driving hydrogen into a region, and in that developing the multiple uses of hydrogen in that region or that area. And I refer to the hydrogen valleys. And the last point for us is a regulatory framework which is supportive. When I mean supportive, it's not only to give incentives, it is to help to develop hydrogen, of course, but also to be stable, to be efficient, and to be, let's say, fair, also fair. Having said that, of course, this means that we have an international approach, and this means that also we cover the issue of liking hydrogen, let's say. I would say it like that. People need to like hydrogen, and they will like hydrogen if they understand and if they benefit. And this is what is behind the development of the concept of hydrogen valleys, where we want to push for having 100 hydrogen valleys worldwide through mission innovation. If I look at the time, I think I am close to the time which was allocated to me. I will not go much more in details. Just to say that hydrogen is a chance, because as I said, we have very few enablers in our hands. So we need to use it at the best way. That we want to work at international level on that, because it should be international. There is no way for us to have ports with refueling stations with hydrogen, if not the rest of the world is using ships with hydrogen. For instance, just as a very basic example, there are many others. Of course, the regulatory framework should be worldwide, especially for standards and guarantees of origin. I would add that if we begin to import renewable hydrogen from countries outside the EU, and in the longer run, these countries are depriving their own market just to export, or if these countries are exporting through means which are not green, not sustainable, then it's not good for the planet, and it's not good for the people, because in the EU we have values, and the value is not to exploit the others, of course. So that, I hope, gives you an overall frame of our overall approach on hydrogen. And I'm sure Mr. Wiebeck will give much more interesting details. So I will stop here, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Helena. Well, thank you for the very detailed explanation and a good preparation for your presentation. And actually, we have a few questions from our audience that we look forward to hearing from you. Ms. Helena, please open your camera and your voice. Yes, we actually have several questions. The first one is that we understand that hydrogen energy market currently needs policy for better governance and supports the development. So for the EU, would there be more of a preference for an overall policy framework for the large EU, or we want to have more national frameworks? Because in particular, we have some EU external trade activities involved and also some intra-EU flows.
Well, this is of course a very challenging question, but I need to recap first that the EU has a power which is given to it by the treaty, no more. It's not like a state. A state can seize itself of any topic, provided that the democratic tools allow it. But in the EU, we have the power given by the treaty. And the energy mix of the member states is a competence of the member states, not of the EU. We can set up jointly with the member states an objective. That is possible. We can frame through regulatory actions or tools which are adopted by the Council and the Parliament. We can frame the markets or the functioning, but we cannot dictate a policy to the member states if we are not allowed to do so by the treaty and by the legal actions which are coming from the treaty. So I guess it gives still, of course, a big margin of maneuver to the member states. And this is very important, because this margin of maneuver makes also fresh ideas and innovation going on. So I'm not that, I will not put the question in that way. The member states have a capacity still, and they need to have a capacity to have their own policy, provided, of course, they do it when it's legitimate in the frame of the EU.
Well, and I actually have a second question. The source of clean hydrogen production that we can see in Europe now includes solar, wind, nuclear, waste, biomass. And in the long run, solar and wind should be our main pursuit. So will there be a policy or regulatory distinction between them for now?
Well, on the side of research, we consider that EU has a lot of renewable energy available. And it is a little bit sad that we limit ourselves to some of them. Of course, solar and wind are the main providers of renewable energy, but other renewable energy like geothermal or hydropower, marine, oceans. I mean, there are many renewable energy which are possibly exploited. And what I explained about the cost and efficiency of the production of hydrogen as a value chain is also valuable for the renewable energy. If in one place you have a big source of geothermal and this is cost effective, or you can make it cost effective, then why not using it? We need to play with our cards and not to limit our game to the most visible ones. We will need all the renewable sources of energy if we want to match the Paris Agreement objectives.
Okay, I truly understand the situation now, and thanks for the answer from the EU level, and thank you for taking your time. Well, next, let's welcome Mr. Bart, Executive Director, Clean Hydrogen Partnership. And he will deliver us a keynote presentation on the topic, accelerating European green hydrogen commercialization. What are the missing pieces? Let's welcome Mr. Bart.
Thank you very much, Cheryl, for your kind introduction. I hope that you hear me very well.
Yes.
Perfect. So yeah, thanks for having me, and I will discuss a little bit more on the missing pieces from a technical perspective. And we just heard Madame Cray talking about policies. Now I will go a bit more deeper on the technical side. So it would be great if you could upload my presentations. I think it will just take a minute probably. You have my presentation?
Oh, yes, please wait a moment.
Yep, no problem. Voila, here we go. So, next slide, please. So I would like to explain a little bit first who is the joint undertaking for those of the audience who do not know exactly yet who we are. So we are the Clean Hydrogen Joint Undertaking. We are a public-private partnership. We have 3 partners, which on the one hand, Hydrogen Europe, which is the industry. They have 470 members. Then we have another private partner, which is Hydrogen Europe Research. It's a separate association. They represent the research community. That means research centers or university. It's non-profit. They have 112 members. And then we have the European Commission, represented by DG Move, the Transport DG, the Energy DG, and the Research DG. So, and together we are basically trying to fund projects, research and innovation projects, in order to accelerate the development of hydrogen and fuel cell technology. Next slide, please. So we have 4 objectives. First is to help and support the implementation of the Commission's hydrogen strategy, which was just explained. And then also to stimulate research and innovation in 3 main areas: in the hydrogen production, then in hydrogen distribution and storage, and also in hydrogen end-use applications. And the third objective is to strengthen the competitiveness of the European clean hydrogen value chain. I mean, we have in Europe, I would say that in Europe we are leading on this technology, and of course we would like to keep that leadership and work together, of course, with other parts of the world. And then the fourth objective is to contribute, of course, to the very ambitious climate goals that the European Union has set themselves. I mean, 2030 minus 55% of CO2, and then 2050 we want to be the first continent to be carbon neutral. Next slide, please. So here you can see a little bit more in detail our research and innovation priorities. I mean, first of all, I need to mention that this is a 2.4 billion euro research program. Half is paid by the European Commission and the other half is paid by the private sector. So our program is a euro for a euro program. So we have three main pillars: is the hydrogen production, electrolyzers, but also other modes of production like direct sunlight conversion into hydrogen, for example. And also we are looking how hydrogen can bring more renewables in the entire energy system. The second pillar is about hydrogen distribution. There we look, of course, in the storage side, but also transport by the natural gas pipelines that we can refurbish, other liquid carriers like methanol, ammonia. But also we are looking into the refueling infrastructure, so mainly the hydrogen refueling stations for multiple applications like train, rail, aviation, but also for trucks and cars. And then the third part is the end-use application. There you have three end-use applications: in the transport side, the heat and power side, and the industry. And in the transport vehicles, I mean, there now we are looking mainly to the heavy-duty side, because the light commercial vehicles and the passenger cars are done. You can buy them. And so we have to go up into the heavy-duty side. And then the heat and power, there we look at the stationary hydrogen fuel cells using pure hydrogen, but also looking to burners and turbines, which is new for us. And in the industry, of course, we continue to work with the steel and cement industry, etc. And then we have two horizontal pillars, which is the hydrogen valleys. Come to that in a moment, but also cross-cutting, which is extremely important. This is to support regulation codes and standards, training, and also safety, of course, and the social acceptance of this technology. And finally, we also support the supply chain, because we need to scale up and we need to find new methodologies how we can produce faster and better and guarantee the quality, of course, of the products. Next slide, please. So when we started in 2016, or when I started in 2016, for me, it was very important to make sure that the regions were involved. And that's why I started a region initiative. Why is that? Because the regions are actually the ones that really have to implement things. They have to show to the citizens what they are doing for decarbonizing the region. That's why we started to work with 100 regions. And that led actually to three main things, which was one, the Project Development Assistance Program. This is a program that we started in order to help regions to develop their projects. I mean, you will see that a lot of regions have fantastic PowerPoints, but these are not projects. So we need to help them to turn their PowerPoint in a real project, which is financially sound as well. And then we had a couple of those regions that really want to go faster, and they assembled themselves in the Hydrogen Valleys Partnership, because for them, the hydrogen and fuel cells will bring a lot of jobs and also a lot of growth in their region, so they want to go faster. And finally, we had some regions that want to go very, very fast, and we created the Hydrogen Valleys. And the Hydrogen Valleys is something which is very much supported by our President of the European Commission, Mrs. Ursula von der Leyen. Next slide. So when we look to the European hydrogen valleys, today we have 58 hydrogen valleys identified in the European Union. 2 from them are already quite advanced, but then 12 are now just starting to be built. And there are 44 which have, of course, as I said, these nice PowerPoints or nice ideas, which we need to, of course, develop further. But this is very good, because as you know, I mean, I received, or the joint undertaking received 200 million euro extra from Commissioner Gabriel in order to produce 50 hydrogen valleys by 2025. And so far, I think we will be able to realize those targets. Next slide, please. So here I would like to talk a little bit on electrolyzers. Of course, there are other modes of producing hydrogen, which we also support, but just this is one of our success stories. I mean, 10 years ago, we started to build the first electrolyzer, was 150 kilowatt. And then we kind of continuously pushed the needle to 1.2, 2.5, you see. And then from 5 megawatts on, we saw the big industries coming in, the steel industry, and this where we built a 6 megawatt actually in Austria, by Voestalpine. And then we saw Refine, the project Refine in Germany with the 10 megawatt, which was with Shell. And then we moved further the needle to 20 megawatt in Jules in the Netherlands. This was mainly with Nourion. And then this will be scaled up to 60 megawatt actually in the project of the Hydrogen Valley. And finally, also there were 3 programs, or 3 projects awarded a 100 megawatt electrolyzer, one in Germany, one in Denmark, and one in Portugal. So you saw that basically in 10 years time, we went more or less from 100 kilowatt to 100 megawatt. Of course, it's not yet enough. We need to go to gigawatt scale, but these will be other programs in the European Union that will tackle that one. I mean, you can think about the Innovation Fund, you can think about the Recovery and Resilience Fund, the Just Transition Fund. All those funds will help to get to the gigawatt scale. What we will do now next as a new challenge is actually to build standard modules. And so you can think about 10 or 20 to 20 megawatt containers, then you put them all next to each other and you can build 100 megawatt, for example. Also replacing materials, I think here on iridium specifically, because in the PEM electrolyzers, we have a lot of iridium. And if we would build all the electrolyzers using the PEM, we just simply do not have enough iridium in the soil. So we need to find something else. And also we will do further cost reduction on the capex, I mean, on the footprint, but also we have to improve the efficiency. Of course, all those things can help, but we should not forget that the biggest cost of 1 kilogram of hydrogen is, of course, the electricity cost. The capex is only 20%. So even if we reduce the capex a lot, still it has a very little impact on the cost of hydrogen itself. Next slide, please. So we also support, of course, the underground storage, and I can tell you we have many projects on underground storage. And here you can see one of the projects in the middle of France, and this is the name is Hipster, where basically we store the hydrogen in salt caverns. Actually, this cavern can potentially store more than 40 terawatt hours of electricity through hydrogen, for example. So this is a lot. And so one of the goals that we had was to check what would be the cost of storage. And we had our KPI set at €1 per kilogram. And actually what was very good is that the final result now is that with 40 cents per kilogram, we can store actually already the hydrogen. Further, this project will also show how the impact of cyclic storage will be on the salt cavern, but also on the quality of the hydrogen itself. Next slide, please. Then we also work on the European Hydrogen Stations network. I mean, we have now almost like 200 hydrogen refueling stations. They are all connected to a server with us in Brussels. You can go to h2map.eu and there you can see all the stations and whether they are open, whether they are closed, or they are in maintenance mode. So we have this live connection. And actually the alternative fuel infrastructure regulation, the AFIR, which will hopefully be voted on by the end of February, beginning of March, will require that, for example, because this is a Commission proposal, every 150 kilometers there is a station. So we will, of course, also help to make sure that we have the right technology available to build out all those stations, because one of these requirements is also that this station needs to refuel trucks. And so today we don't have yet so many truck stations on this one. It's mainly for passenger cars, so we need to work on the refueling speed. We need to work on the storage of hydrogen at each of these hydrogen refueling stations. So still a lot of research work needs to be done there. Next slide. Also, we work on fuel cell buses since a long time, and we have done 7 projects on that. In the beginning, we just put like tens of buses, but now we put hundreds of buses in the projects of JIVE and JIVE 2. What we have realized is that we created around 6 suppliers now, where you can just order those fuel cell buses as a competition, and this is good. We need competition to further drive down the cost. So all the buses are ordered, and I think they will get very, very soon all being deployed, normally by the end of this year, but maybe it might be still beginning of next year as well, but then all will be on the road. And also we triggered, of course, the interest from other European OEMs. What was the key achievement as well, that from the first project, Acute, until now the last JIVE 2 project, we were able to reduce the price from 1.8 million euro to now more or less 300,000 euro when you order a decent number of buses, like 100 buses in one go. And that means that today this technology is competitive with battery technology. Next slide. So also we work on heavy duty trucks. We will see very soon the first trucks on the road. Actually, last week I went to announce the first truck that went on the road. This was in the H2Hole project in Belgium with Colruyt. There the first truck was launched and is now running. Also the first hydrogen refueling station was then also opened at the same time. So we are getting now the first H2Hole trucks on the road. Also, you will see next week we will open another this refuse truck. I mean, we will fund 15 refuse trucks in the project Revive, and next week we will in Antwerp also put one of these trucks on the road, becoming an operation. We had already them available in Breda, but you see that gradually also now the trucks are basically coming on the road. I mean, the industry has committed themselves to put 100,000 trucks and 1,500 HRSs by 2030 in the EU. Also, we work internationally together with our colleagues of, for example, the US and Japan and Korea in the project Pride, where we make sure that we have a standard refueling protocol for the trucks. Next slide. Here you can see the trains. I mean, trains are really getting very popular in Europe. Hydrogen trains, you can see that many countries, they start to work on that. Of course, everything started in Germany in 2018 with Alstom. And one of our projects is now quite new, is in Spain, actually. This is FCH2 Rail, where basically we provide a hybrid mode. So basically when there is a catenary, it uses the catenary. When there's no catenary, we switch over to fuel cells to propel the train. So this is new, has not been demonstrated before, but that will give, again, a lot of flexibility for the trains and also to use in a way the electricity in a very efficient way. Next slide. Also, we support a lot the maritime applications, as you can see already since 2013, but then a little bit the same story like the electrolyzers. I mean, we started with 50 kilowatt fuel cell, and now we are at 3 megawatt. Again, gradually we pushed the needle. What we see mainly in maritime is that you will have different kind of fuels to be used. I mean, we have projects that using compressed gas hydrogen, pure hydrogen. We have liquid hydrogen, but also we use, for example, ammonia in some of the projects. So it's not yet decided what would be the fuel for maritime. Probably it will be a combination of everything, but of the various fuel. What we see though, that for port operations and maybe inland waterways, we see rather pure hydrogen being used, because okay, maybe with ammonia it's not the best fuel to be used in areas where people are living. But what we see, for example, like Maersk in 2023, so next year, they will start with methanol. The methanol will actually be produced in Spain, what I understood. They just signed a big deal with that. And so again, here you can see for intercontinental shipping that probably methanol or ammonia will be used because the storage capacity for pure hydrogen is just simply not enough. And also we are helping the ports like with special equipment to put on hydrogen. This is a project H2 Ports in the port of Valencia, where basically the reach stackers or the yard tractors are put on hydrogen. Next slide, please. Also, we work very much on aviation. For aviation, there is basically no other solution than hydrogen if we would like to have zero emission aviation. And that's why in the last year, or this year actually, we have put together with our colleagues of the Clean Aviation, which is another joint undertaking, we have brought together a lot of money in order to develop, in our case, the building blocks like the fuel cells, like the tanks, or the next generation MEAs, and actually develop them, then to give them to our Clean Aviation joint undertaking, who will build them in the aviation. So we kind of share the tasks, and we will build the building blocks, and Clean Aviation Joint Undertaking will integrate them in the plan. And so together we have put this year alone 270 million euro in research on aviation with hydrogen. Actually, Airbus is quite active. You can see they are presented kind of 3 models on liquid hydrogen, and they target actually 2035 to enter the service. And this is very much supported, for example, with the country France, which also clearly set this ambition by 2034-5, they want to fly zero emission. Next slide, please. But from next year, we also will support off-road applications. Here you can see a number of those off-road applications like Ford New Holland or the excavator from JCB and so on. So things are moving, but we also have to make sure that off-road is also getting decarbonized. And that is why next year, in January, we will launch our next call, and there will be some call for proposals also for off-road applications. So stay tuned. Next slide, please. As it was already mentioned by Ms. Cray, is that we have to work on education, because at the moment when I talk to CEOs, one of the main comments is that they do not find the workforce. And the goals of the European Union, as you heard, are very ambitious. So if we do not have the right people, we also will miss our goals, of course, because we will have nobody to build it. So that's why we will focus a lot on this, on the various types of education for young professionals, for technical people, regulators, first responders. So there's a huge amount of education to be done. And that is why also next year we will launch the European Hydrogen Academy to make sure that there will be a portfolio of different types of education programs based on the needs, of course. Next slide, please. And that's it. Here you have my coordinates. If you have any more questions, of course, happy to help, or also I think there's still some time left to answer some questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bart. Thank you for the very generous sharing. Actually, it's really informative. So my question is that you mentioned various energy carriers. Is there a particular focus on these options? Because we have SCOH, methanol, ammonia, and there's so many options. If it's a decentralized investment, does it create a fragmentation of resources? And should it be limited to 2 or 3 options? And which parameters do you think that can help to lower the cost for using green hydrogen or ammonia?
So, I mean, we will have, as I said, I mean, I think the jury is still out there. It's not yet decided, because a lot of things will depend on the regulations. Huh? For example, if we take methanol, I mean, which CO2 can you use? Huh? Normally, CO2 that you capture, for example, from direct air capture from out of the air, it is not a problem. Probably you can make the methanol from there. But what we need to make sure is that we do not create additional value streams. So we need to make sure that it's clear which CO2, for example, can be used for this methanol. And also in Europe, we will have the carbon border adjustment mechanism, the CBAM. So how will the CBAM treat methanol, for example? We all need to see what the exact regulation will be. And if it's maybe very restrictive, maybe methanol might not be so successful. So we need to see. Also on ammonia, there is also the regulator need to define the safety requirements. For example, in ports, at this moment, the bunkering of ammonia is very, very limited by regulation, but for safety reasons. So if this regulation is not changing and we can only bunker very little things, yeah, maybe we cannot bring the green hydrogen through ammonia. We will see a very fast increase of the usage of hydrogen in the industry. Also, secondly, we have the AFIR. I explained that probably beginning of next year, this will be decided. Then again, you will see a big uptake of hydrogen, because we will have to start building those stations, and then the truck OEMs will also come. So I'm not too much worried about the awareness among the industry. I think they know very well. It's still maybe a little bit awareness that we need to build in society with the population, with the citizens. I think there is still some work to be done, and we are working on that. Actually, we just finished a survey on what is the level of knowledge of hydrogen in the different member states. We will publish this beginning of next year, the results. And then based on those results, we might take some specific actions in order to build awareness in certain member states. But we first need to see what is the lack, what is still people don't know, and how we can address those lack in society. So we are working on that very much. I think you're muted, Cheryl. We don't hear you.
I'm sorry. Well, I think one of our audience think Hydrogen Valley is mainly established in areas with developed industries. So if some areas with light industry or service industries such as Cyprus also want to participate in the hydrogen energy industry chain, how should they do?
So, I mean, if, for example, Cyprus would like to participate in the hydrogen valleys, I would definitely recommend them to first contact us and let's discuss and see. I definitely believe they have a case because they have to decarbonize this maritime side. I mean, they have a lot of ships going there as well, and also they have still they are using quite a lot of oil and gas, especially oil as well. So let's see, let's sit together and let's build a narrative for them. I mean, even aviation, I mean, they need hydrogen to decarbonize aviation industry at some point in time. So I know they have also a lot of wind farms. So the point with the hydrogen valley is that you need to have a narrative for each of the valley, and each valley has a different narrative. It's really, you have to study their local situation, analyze it, and see how hydrogen can help them to achieve their goals. So I would say, for sure, there is an opportunity for Cyprus, for example, to participate, but the best way is to join one of our workshops on hydrogen valleys. Probably we will have another workshop beginning of next year in February. Just subscribe to our newsletter, and then you will hear when those workshops will be held, and then join and discuss also with those people. Because we have already a couple of hydrogen valleys, and they are more than eager to share their learnings as well. And then let's work together to develop something in those areas. But for sure, we need to build a hydrogen valley in every member state. This is what the commissioner asked me to do, and I will get it done, including Cyprus.
Thank you for the very powerful answer, and thank you for all the speech and the sharing today, Mr. Bhatt. And then let's welcome our third honored guest speaker, Ms. Aria Basanda, Head of Service Hydrogen, Deputy Director of Hydrocarbons and New Fuels from the Spain government.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can hear you, Ms. Aria.
Fine. I am Iria Basanta. I work at the Deputy Directorate of Hydrocarbons and New Fuels at the Spanish Ministry for Ecological Transition and Demographic Challenge. First, I'd like to express my gratitude to the organizing committee of the Connecting Green Hydrogen Europe for inviting me as a speaker today. And also, it's a pleasure to have you as an audience, so thank you. I'm sorry, should I share my screen? Are you going to put the slides yourself?
Yes. You can share your screen now.
Okay, perfect. 1 second. Okay. Fine. Can you see the slides?
Yes, it's fine.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So today I will be talking about Spain's role in building the European hydrogen resilience through an overview of recent energy policy and regulatory developments on hydrogen in Spain, and also what are next steps. So there is no doubt that the European Union is fully committed to achieving climate neutrality by year 2050, and that renewable hydrogen will play a very important role to reach 2030 and beyond EU targets. Of course, we all agree that this will not be an easy task. And furthermore, the Russian invasion of Ukraine has led to the acceleration of energy transition. The REPowerEU Plan seeks to speed up hydrogen economy aiming to increase hydrogen production to 10 million tons by year 2030, and inputs to be 10 million tons of hydrogen by year 2030 also. So the European hydrogen strategy is one of the most challenging strategies of our recent times, but Spain wants to be part of its achievement, no doubt. So today we will begin with a general overview of the energy context in Spain that has led to the existing planning, including hydrogen. We will then see first actions that were taken in Spain towards hydrogen economy, and namely our hydrogen roadmap. And we'll end with concrete measures such as regulatory developments, financial support to projects, and some next steps to take. Energy context, we shall begin by introducing briefly the Spanish energy strategy, which is based on two pillar documents. First, we have the National Integrated Energy and Climate Plan, which is known as PNIEC. This plan sets the targets for year 2030. Targets such as a cut in greenhouse gas emissions of at least 23%, 42% renewables in energy consumption, 74% renewables in electricity consumption, and also 39.5% of energy efficiency. Second, we have the long-term strategy for a decarbonized economy in year 2050, which sets obviously the targets for year 2050. And it proposes at least 90% reduction in emissions and 100% renewable energy mix by that year. So together, both documents set the base for energy policies and regulatory actions coming after that will have to be oriented towards reaching the mentioned targets. Also last year, the law on climate change and energy transition was passed in Spain. Article 12 of the law establishes a mandate with regards to promotion of renewable gases. This means the government shall promote renewable gases through specific plans in order to achieve goals that are established in the PNIEC, and regulation shall also favor industrial usage, mobility applications, and blending of renewable gases. Meaning now such promotion of renewable gases is in law in Spain. As for the European scenario, as said, the EU has a strong commitment to climate neutrality by 2050 and has taken action in the form of the Fit for 55 package. In the wake of the Fit for 55 package, there are many regulations that are being reviewed in order to facilitate the uptake of renewable gases, such as renewable hydrogen. Among these, we have the revision of the Renewable Energy Directive, which is taking place now. Also, the regulation for the deployment of alternative fuels and infrastructure that was mentioned by Bart, and the revision of the gas package regulation and directive as well. Although these last two are a bit less advanced for the moment being, all of them are expected to contribute to renewable gases deployment at national level. And focusing on the renewables directive, which is the one a bit more advanced, some of the main outcomes to expect could be the impulse of renewable hydrogen in transport through specific targets, also an impulse through specific targets to industrial usage of hydrogen, and an impulse to the establishment of systems of guarantees of renewable origin. How do the European and the Spanish strategies intertwine? The European hydrogen strategy constitutes a framework for Spain's own national strategy. However, Spain is fully focused on renewable hydrogen, while Europe in the short and medium term allows a greater weight of low carbon hydrogen produced from natural gas with carbon capture or nuclear energy to rapidly reduce emissions from current hydrogen production, and in order to support the parallel and future use of renewable hydrogen. So while the hydrogen roadmap Europe sets a target to reach 40 gigawatts of electrolyzers by year 2030, in Spain, the hydrogen roadmap shoots for 4 gigawatts of installed electrolyzers capacity in 2030. So that would be 10% of the EU target in Spain alone. About the actual deployment of electrolyzers, I like to highlight that the ENSOC has enabled a hydrogen project visualization platform where anyone can check the existing electrolyzer projects in Spain. As you can see from a snippet here in the slide, existing projects are scattered throughout the country, but mainly located at industrial hubs or nearby big consumers such as refineries, fertilizer producers, steel industry, or the chemical industry in general. This also speaks to the Spanish hydrogen strategy. So for the initial phase of the deployment of hydrogen projects in our country, we have prioritized hydrogen production located close to big consumption sites. In Spain, we believe that hydrogen valleys or clusters are key to kickstart renewable hydrogen for two main reasons. One, in a context of urgency to decarbonize ourselves and reduce our energy dependence from the outside, as we are. It just makes sense to tackle biggest consumers first, as is the measure with the greatest, fastest impact. And second, this solution also minimizes transport needs. Locating production and consumption together is not also more efficient, as it eliminates transportation costs and losses, and thus more economically viable, especially for pioneer projects, but also it avoids the construction of very expensive infrastructure. So while we recognize that a hydrogen grid would possibly be needed in the future, we don't see benefits in rushing to commission high-cost pipelines when it's not yet possible to know what the optimal grid development will be. So this approach is meant to avoid leaving stranded assets behind and possibly taking decisions now that may condition our alternatives later when we have better information. Well, we're going to move now to actions taken in Spain, and particularly the hydrogen roadmap. The hydrogen roadmap was published in year 2020, and it contains Spain's hydrogen strategy, and thus is the reference document to keep in mind. Apart from the mentioned 4 gigawatt target, it sets all the targets for year 2030, such as renewable hydrogen accounting for 25% of hydrogen consumption, a fleet of 150 to 200 hydrogen fuel cell buses, 100 to 150 hydrogen refueling stations, or 2 commercial train lines propelled with hydrogen, among others. And it also includes a set of 60 measures to achieve set targets. Nearly 500,000 tons of fossil hydrogen are consumed in Spain each year that have the potential to be rapidly and directly decarbonized. While in 2020, we estimated that it would be possible to reach a target of 25% of current hydrogen consumption to be renewable in 2030. After only 2 years, we are expecting projects in our country for that date to overpass that target by large. So it sounds very promising so far. The action lines included in the roadmap can be divided into regulatory tools, sectorial tools, transversal tools, and also R&D support tools. Regulatory tools include administrative simplification. So permit granting processes for hydrogen projects are often lengthy and overcomplicated. We are working on making things easier for project promoters. Of course, permit granting has to remain equally guaranteeing, but without lowering the bar for requirements, it is possible to make the process smoother and shorter. One thing to consider, though, is that the permit granting process and requirements mainly come from the EU, and there is a need for a more clear and up-to-date process to be defined at European level. Other regulatory tools are the recently approved guarantees of origin system that I will discuss in a slide yet to come. And within the sectoral tools, let me highlight the initiative to identify the current hydrogen consumption poles, promoting and encouraging the creation of hydrogen valleys or clusters, the constitution of industrial hydrogen roundtables that will be promoted together with the rest of the administrations, hydrogen consumers, and promoters of renewable hydrogen production projects to encourage the development of pilot projects. So far, the focus of the creation of such roundtables has been on the petrochemical hubs. There are also measures as well for the mobility sector, such as incentives for the purchase of vehicles, plus deployment of hydrogen charging stations, sectorial measures to facilitate hydrogen integration as an energy vector within the system, and the development of a national statistics system for hydrogen that will ensure knowledge of the hydrogen sector and traceability of its production, logistics, and users. Then we have transversal tools that are mainly targeted at increasing and spreading public knowledge on hydrogen technologies to tackle public rejection due to lack of understanding. And finally, we of course have measures directed boosting R&D on hydrogen technologies. Let's move now to the regulatory developments made so far, also financial support and next steps. Within European regulatory actions, I'd like to underscore the importance of the delegated act on additionality, which is at trilogy stage at the moment. Spain fully agrees on the need to install additional renewable electricity generation capacity to avoid any competition between electrolyzers and all the direct users of renewable electricity that can slow down our efforts to decarbonize the economy. Direct electrification is always more efficient, but sometimes it's not economically or technically feasible. However, we do acknowledge the fact that renewable hydrogen projects today need flexibility and the establishment of very restrictive requirements, for example, when talking about time correlation, are likely to hinder the growth of the hydrogen economy and put in danger the 2030 targets. So renewable hydrogen projects need incentives and low risk for a fast deployment in order to avoid the deviation of investment towards other non-sustainable solutions. In relation to this topic, there is also the recent proposal for Council regulation laying down a framework to accelerate the deployment of renewable energy. The proposal is an extraordinary measure to be applied for a limited period of time. Such regulation pretends to establish a fast track for solar and wind energy projects. Lengthy and complex administrative procedures have been identified as one of the key obstacles hampering the speed and number of investments in renewables and its related infrastructure. As you should know, when it comes to hydrogen projects, many of them come with dedicated renewable plants. Other projects use renewable PPAs. So one way or another, they are affected by the permitting process of renewable plants. And as said before, there is no point in a competition between electrolyzers and other direct uses of renewable electricity. Moving to national regulatory actions, the guarantees of origin system has been recently put in place. One of the main mechanisms to favor the deployment of renewable gases is the establishment of a system of guarantees of origin that credits the use of renewable sources in their production. In May this year, Royal Decree 376 of 2022 introduced the system of guarantees of origin of renewable gases in Spain. And just about a month ago, an order approved the procedure for the management of the system of guarantees of origin of gas from renewable sources. So about the procedure, let me bring out the creation of a registry of facilities for the production of gases from renewable sources, which is applicable to all renewable gases, and that of course includes renewable hydrogen. One guarantee of origin will equal 1 megawatt hour and shall be issued in favor of the gas producer. Also, the system will allow the issuance of transfer, export, import, and redemption of the guarantee of origin. The responsible body will be asked the Ministry for Ecological Transition. And so far, the purpose of the registry is to keep control of the players and production capacity available in our country, as we believe the guarantees of origin to be a powerful tool to promote the use of renewable gases such as hydrogen. Okay, so we've seen the regulatory actions, and let's take a look now at the public funding lines enabled by the Spanish government. So component 9 of the recovery plan of our country establishes 1.5 billion euros of public funds to support renewable hydrogen projects, a support that will help to estimate to reach the estimated investment of 8.9 billion euros in the hydrogen roadmap. So far, 2 calls have been launched to support private projects with public funding. The first one is dedicated to singular pioneer projects with 150 million euros allocated. The other one intended to boost the whole value chain with 250 million euros allocated. Both lines will be soon solved. And this will be 2 out of 4 lines in total included in the component 9. Line 2 is still to come and will be dedicated to hydrogen valleys or clusters, boosting sectoral integration at large scale. Finally, line 4 will keep the funds for IPCEIs. So IPCEIs stand for important projects of common European interest. Those are large projects that address a market failure or other important systemic failures in a European context and based on common European interest. As you may know, in December 2020, 22 EU countries and Norway signed a manifesto paving the way for a cleaner hydrogen value chain and committing to launch IPCEIs in the hydrogen sector. Signatories committed to jointly design and eventually launch IPCEIs and agreed that projects should cover the full value chain from renewable and low carbon hydrogen production to hydrogen storage, transmission, distribution, and hydrogen application, notably in industrial sectors. So as a result of all of this, Spain has participated in 3 waves, as they are called. IPCEI Hy2Tech, dedicated to hydrogen technology, was solved in July this year with 4 Spanish projects approved, representing 10% of the totality of approved projects. IPCEI Hy2Use was dedicated to industrial applications, also solved in September this year. There were 7 winning projects in Spain, meaning 20% of the total amount of projects approved in the whole EU. There were other 2 projects that were initially presented to Hy2Use that have been transferred over to the Climate, Energy and Environmental Assistance Guidelines scheme, also known as CEAC. The reason was that these projects were better suited to receive funds under CEAC, and one of them has already been notified. And last but not least, we have IPCEI Mobility and Transport, dedicated to transport applications. This wave was pre-notified in September, and we are waiting to hear from the Commission now. Finally, we have the projects of common interest, not to be confused with the previous IPCEIs. PCIs are key cross-border energy infrastructure projects to build a more integrated and resilient EU internal energy market. The new revised TENI regulation includes hydrogen infrastructures as eligible to become PCIs for the first time. We had seen other PCIs in Spain, like the underwater electrical connection with France and the Bay of Biscay. And now we may begin at least to see hydrogen PCIs too. In fact, as an example of a candidate project, hydrogen project to PCI in Spain, we can mention the recently announced green hydrogen corridor between Portugal, Spain, and France. As shown in the slide, planned infrastructure for the project includes an onshore connection with Portugal from Cerro Dávila to Zamora, and then an offshore connection with France, Barcelona, Marseille. So Spain actively participates in the PCI project process, and this is one of the most powerful tools today to enhance European hydrogen resilience. So that was all for today. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you found the presentation worthwhile. This was basically a quick overview of the work we do in the Deputy Directorate. Leaving here our email in case anyone wants to contact the hydrogen team in ITECO. We're always happy to hear from you. But thanks again. I don't want to take any more time.
Thank you, Ms. Ariel. And you mentioned that Spain will focus mainly on the renewable energy and hydrogen portfolio. Does that mean you are going to give these kind of new projects an extra green lane in terms of approval? And another very important part is storage. Hydrogen energy itself is also a form of energy storage. So where more support be provided in energy storage projects as well?
Okay, I'm sorry, I hear you very low. Can you repeat the second part of the question?
The first part is about approval of new project of renewable energy plus hydrogen. And the second one is the topic of storage. We would like to know whether the Spain government will give more support on the energy storage projects as well.
Okay, so as for the first part, yes, as I said, we are focused on renewable hydrogen only, as we understand that low carbon hydrogen doesn't solve the problem of independence from the outside in energetic terms. So far we are focusing on supporting projects with renewable hydrogen as the hydrogen roadmap states. And then about storage of hydrogen, we are not ruling that out, although our current funding lines are not focused on hydrogen storage per se, as we are of course preparing a line for hydrogen valleys and clusters that we for sure could include hydrogen storage projects, although that ultimately always depends on project promoters and what they present to us.
And we also knew that renewable electricity is also a good source of power itself. If we encouraged more green hydrogen, where it lead to a loss of the portion that should go to the power grid. So where additional regulatory distinctions be made for electricity used on the grid and electricity used for hydrogen production.
Yes, well, so far, as I mentioned in the presentation, hydrogen projects need to either have a dedicated renewable plant, so they would be taking power from a dedicated renewable plant that's built for the project, or another option is to have a renewable PPA agreement, renewable PPA signed. And as we said, we are working and waiting for the additionality regulation to be passed to better define all these matters.
Okay, well, thank you for the answer. And I think Mr. Pierre would like to know more about the Hyper project, the Spain to France corridor. Could you give us more introduction of this part?
I mean, that's been recently announced in the press, and I'm not really the person to speak about that. So far, the only thing I can tell you is that it could be a possible candidate PCI process, and we're still studying all matters related to that. So I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to leave you with that. I'm sorry.
Okay, I understand. And more information, let's follow up the announcement from the Spain government. And
yeah, we'll have to wait for official press publications.
And one of our audience is also curious that the current external environment is changing very fast. We have energy crisis, we have the Ukraine war. So where Spain updates your hydrogen roadmap in the next 6 months?
Yes, I don't know next month, but maybe in a year. As I said, we established certain targets in year 2020, and everything's changed so much. And also, well, apart from the unfortunate war and everything, at least there are some good news that we're overpassing the targets we set in 2020. So we thought it was ambitious, or it was ambitious at the moment, but now we can shoot for more. So yes, it's likely you can expect an update of the hydrogen roadmap next year, maybe, with even more ambitious targets and dispositions. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Arias. Thank you for all the answers and also for the very detailed presentation.
Thank you.
And a very healthy market needs a collaboration between public and private sectors. So Mr. Jonas Mobel from Green Hydrogen Organization will then illustrate how it works for green hydrogen. Let's welcome him to deliver the presentation, Revitalizing Global Green Transition Ecosystems, Green Hydrogen and Renewable.
Thank you very much. And it's absolutely brilliant to follow the very detailed presentations, not least by Ariane, but hugely informative. And it is, of course, an incredibly fast-moving situation that we are all experiencing. This is not just an industry that is growing, it is an industry that is going from virtually non-existent to being very significant very quickly. Let me just press one more button here, and here we are. I hope you can see that now. Just as Iria left, making it clear that the Spanish policy is about renewable green hydrogen, so is ours. That is, we have to make sure that and remind ourselves that hydrogen is not by definition a low carbon fuel. It all depends on how it is created. We also agree with Iria and the Spanish government that if you can put something into the renewable grid, it's probably a good thing to do so. That's the inner circle here. You can debate about when you need to put the battery into things, but as a general rule, if you can put a battery into things, that is probably a good thing too. You're still left with up to a quarter of final energy use in the outer ring that needs to be decarbonized over the next 20-30 years. And that will require green hydrogen or its derivatives. As I've said, it is really only renewable green hydrogen that is strictly aligned with 1.5 degree pathways, at least according to the UN. We've set the target of 100 million tons of green hydrogen by 2030 globally. And we think there's a lot of text here, but my point is simply that, and following what Bart said, a lot of that early green hydrogen will go to be used as green ammonia for international shipping. Some of it will be used in steel making, quite a lot of it will be used in fertilizer making, and then you have a number of other applications, including power and so on. Having consulted a wide range of very large companies, the breakdown you see here is the one we came up with in order to reach that target of 100 million tons by 2030. This is a very imprecise science, but turning a little bit to where it is going to come from. Now, these maps are changing by the day. Just today, the South African president, Ramaphosa, is hosting a huge summit in South Africa, where there are a number of new announcements. During COP27, 2 weeks ago, the Egyptian government announced 9 projects at a total value of well over $100 billion. And so on. So there is a lot of happening. One needs to take these figures with huge amounts of both optimism. There are things happening, but also of skepticism in the sense that we don't know which of these projects that will happen, and there are many other projects that are not being reflected here because the evolution is happening so very quickly at the moment. We have spoken relatively little in this seminar about the Inflation Reduction Act, but it is, of course, a complete game changer for our industry. In a briefest nutshell, or in brief, what it means is, of course, that there's a tax credit in the US of up to $3 per kilo of hydrogen. Well, there are, of course, incentives, as Iria and Bart have spoken about, in various ways along the supply chain, also in Europe. But I don't think we should be surprised, as I put in the chat box, if there will be further measures introduced in Europe to create more of an enabling environment, to make sure that we in Europe too do whatever we can to kickstart this industry, to make sure that it overcomes some of those first mover disadvantages. Some of the things that needs to happen, both within the EU and globally, is the best, of course, that we cannot, is of course, if we were to have greater pricing of carbon emissions. We can, of course, not wait for global such regimes, except to say that we are seeing movements, in particular in a couple of different sectors, that may result in better pricing of carbon emissions. One of the biggest bottlenecks for this 100 million tons, or a very rapid production acceleration of the green hydrogen economy, is, of course, we need huge amounts of renewable energy capacity. My second point here. we need roughly to, if we take the numbers of Bloomberg New Energy, we need roughly to double all production within our supply chain every year between now and 2030 to hit that 100 million tons by 2030. That means we need roughly to double the amount of renewable energy capacity. In other words, we need to roughly double the amount of PVs we produce and use. Same with wind, same with capacity within our systems, and so on and so forth. Now, we do see maybe not a sort of Moore's law like we had in computer processing capacity, where the capacity increased, doubled roughly every 2 years, but we see a kind of systems increase in a similar way, where there are continued efficiencies on the solar side. There are massive efficiency increases on the wind side, and also in terms of how we use our systems. We need to recognize that our governments still have a very important role in terms of setting demand targets, and we're seeing a huge amount of activities here, not least in some of the very large economies. I mentioned the US, but also in India, we're seeing similar things, and also to some extent in Europe. We need, as Bart spoke about, also on other forms, for example, contracts for difference. And what that means, just for those that don't follow it, is essentially that we in Europe try to encourage the rapid production also elsewhere, because although we see very promising green hydrogen production plans in, for example, Spain, it is not going to cover the demands in Europe. That is, of course, very clear. So we need to import a lot. And that means, and measures like contracts for difference can here play a key role in terms of essentially providing a financial incentives to make that import happen faster. We need various forms of concessionary and blended finance solutions. And in particular, we need risk mitigation. What I mean by this is that, of course, a lot of the green hydrogen production is going to happen in developing countries and emerging economies. And we need to ask ourselves, how is that going to be funded? And in particular, how are we going to manage risks? If you think back to my slide here, just take, for example, Mauritania. Here you can see there are actually now 3 projects at least there, but there's one project that is costed at $40 billion in an economy of 6.7. The GDP of Mauritania is $6.7 billion. This energy opportunity is extraordinary for Mauritania, for export markets in Europe and elsewhere. If we're going to manage the climate emergency or avoid climate emergency, we need those projects. There is no doubt about it. So the question is, how do we fund and how do we de-risk it in a country such as Mauritania? And here, the development banks, World Bank, European Investment Bank, and others need to play a role of a size that they have never seen before. My last point on this slide here is that we need recognized standards, certification schemes, as Irja has spoken about. We also need to make sure that these very large projects truly bring development benefits locally. We are, of course, politically going to undermine the urgent measures needed in the form of the accelerated production and use of green hydrogen, unless we make sure that we bring development benefits nationally and locally. What do I mean by that? Again, you can take the example of Mauritania. We need to make sure that we contribute to reliable energy access in Mauritania. We need to make sure that it brings a wide range of economic benefits. As the Mauritanian Minister of Energy said many times during COP, we recognize that these big projects are not going to bring immediate fiscal returns for our country. We have to make sure that they bring longer-term economic returns. The Green Hydrogen Standard is something that our organization, together with a wide range of stakeholders, adopted earlier this year, very much demanded by industry, essentially saying, give us a definition of what green hydrogen actually is. And it has an emissions maximum, which is, if you want to know, 1 kilo, and it's a little bit on how you measure, but essentially 1 kilo of CO2 equivalent emissions per kilo of hydrogen. The standard also has a number of other requirements, both in terms of wider ESG, if you like, and with that I mean sort of water use, land use, and so on. And thirdly, it also has a number of requirements on the development impact, on those aspects I just spoke about. The standard is currently being you can jump that over as well. The standard is currently being piloted by a group of companies around the world, and then it will be increasingly started to use on some of these very large projects. Now, a key challenge and opportunity for governments like the Spanish one and global standard actors like us is, of course, to make sure that their origin of certificate of origin scheme and global efforts, that this standard, that these actually talk and refer to each other. So you have, if you like, you adhere to the principle of mutual recognition. And it's therefore very important that these sorts of standards take as a starting point legislation, both in the countries where green hydrogen might be produced and in the countries where it might be received and used. This green hydrogen contracting for people and planet is another effort just to highlight some of the work that needs to happen. We hear about all of these big projects, but how far have they actually come? And the answer here is some not very far, others a little bit further. But my key point is there is still a lot of unknown. We don't quite yet know what the contracts look like. So one of the determining factors for how quickly our industry will grow and how quickly we will start to be able to receive all of this green hydrogen depends on a lot of sequencing in getting to these big projects. So how do we first get towards a bankable offtake agreements? That in part lies and is determined by what kind of pricing mechanisms do we have? What kind of risk sharing do we have between the developers and the off-takers? And you can then see that there's quite a lot of contractual terms and other things that still needs to be worked out. What are the fiscal regimes, for example, within many of these governments? Again, that has not been determined in many of these cases. And again, these are the sorts of things that this project, bringing together 6 law firms, working across the industry and across jurisdictions, and a couple of developers and others, are trying to pool the now rapidly emerging good practice and then put it out in the public, so that, if you like, we tease out what's emerging in confidential relationships and then put it out in the public so that everyone can benefit from these lessons and get everything to happen faster. And here are some of the under these numbers, some of the things that this project is looking at, just to give you an idea of the kinds of issues and topics that one needs to work through at great speed. There is also the effort of the Green Hydrogen Charter, which has a set of general principles that provide a starting point for many of those legal and contractual arrangements. Towards the end, I also want to just mention there are something called there are a number of regional efforts, of course, not just in Europe, but around the world. And as President Ramaphosa spoke about earlier this morning, when the African Green Hydrogen Forum opened in South Africa, he particularly addressed that South Africa is a founding member of something called the Africa Green Hydrogen Alliance. It consists of these founding countries, and then a couple of other ones are joining as well. And it's a kind of leadership group that are really trying to learn from each other and create the laws, the legal systems and so on required to make sure that this industry takes off quickly. I did speak a little bit about finance, and this is a report that our little organization launched again during COP in Egypt. And again, making the point that these organizations, so the European Investment Bank, the EBRD, World Bank, and so on, will, as I've said before, need to play an absolute key role in working together with private finance in coming up with new forms and new sizes of blended finance solutions. What do I mean by that? Traditionally, blended finance and support usually meant that, okay, we need a little bit of money in the beginning on soft terms to show proof of concept or a pilot project, maybe 50 megawatt or something. The industry is not waiting for that. It hasn't got time for it. Climate hasn't got time for that either. They are moving towards very large-scale projects straight away. And private finance will have to do the most of the heavy lifting of the funding. But as I said, these institutions need to play a key role in de-risking and in providing underlying concessionary terms that makes these projects commercially viable. And here we need to work together across a number of kinds of organizations and companies and civil society and so on in a way we've never done before. In summary, I think it is very important to remember that this green hydrogen economy is not about a new energy vector. It is about that this industrial map is being redrawn. We are moving where we produce steel. We are moving where we are producing fertilizers. We are moving where we are refueling large vessels. There is a lot of production and change that will change. It will create enormous amounts of opportunities, but obviously also some tensions as we shift away from the fossil fuel economy to a more integrated renewable economy where the green hydrogen dimension plays a key role. And key questions here is making sure that we do this responsibly, truly bringing benefits for everyone. For governments, in particular here, I'm thinking of the ones that are going to be hosting production. It's often a question of not being short-term greedy, but think that these are very long-term things and we need long-term stable contracts. and for industry to recognize that that stability of contracting often relies on not being too greedy, if you like, in the longer term. I've spoken very much about the role of de-risking. Civil society, almost weirdly, have been relatively slow, if I may say so, in getting involved in many of these issues. They need to be consulted. They need to ensure oversight. They need to be participating in shaping and contributing to these things very quickly. So lastly, the absolute key is making sure that we're not just rushing, and therefore doing a little bit too many mistakes, but that we, while rushing, while working with urgency, make sure that we build in contractual transparency, accountability, and that we collaborate in building trust with our communities as we see this transition get underway. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mr. Jonas, and thank you for the introduction of the actions we should do regarding policy, standard, and finance. So I have a question, actually. I know there's a view in the discussion of hydrogen that we should first encourage the development of all forms of hydrogen and then pursue renewable sources for production, rather than restricting it at the beginning and raising the barrier to entry. So what are your thoughts on such a viewpoint?
If you can do hydrogen well, that is low carbon through other means other than renewable, great. But we've got to be clear. And with clarity, I mean, even some of the largest oil and gas companies recognize that blue hydrogen, fossil fuel-based hydrogen with carbon storage, has to have a capture rate above 95% to play a meaningful role in the decarbonization of our society. So, and at the moment, we have virtually no such blue hydrogen projects, either in design, we've got a couple in design, but we have none that is actually producing. So, Cheryl, I think that what we see is actually that renewable green hydrogen projects will take off faster than blue projects. And I think that, as I said, if you can do blue well, that's great, and we need that as well. But let's not give blue that isn't particularly blue a bigger role than it actually ought to have from a carbon reducing perspective.
Thank you for the answer. And I think Ms. Christina from our audience mentioned the recent votation of the European Parliament regarding the non-additionality needed for the energy of electrolysis. She wants to know the influence for the green hydrogen improvement and the renewable increase in the Europe.
Well, I think I didn't, sorry, I missed the question, but anyway, yes, I mean, we will have to wait and see, as we heard from Helen, I think it was earlier today, we'll have to see how the Commission now responds to the Parliament's vote and what the final delegated act on additionality actually says. I think Iria is absolutely right. Additionality in a European context is something very important. I do think that pricing of power in Europe is so high and will remain high for a long time to come that it will be difficult anyway for PPA power to make for green hydrogen to make it competitive. So I'm not. I think that is a European issue. At the same time, it's important that we don't create additionality rules that are designed in such a way that it does not encourage grid connectivity in developing countries and emerging economies that are otherwise energy poor. That is to say, if we again take the example of Mauritania, we can't have rules in Europe that for the export from a country like Mauritania puts barriers to grid connectivity. It has to be the opposite. We have to make sure that we share power in a way. And there are a number of ways to, if you like, balance the need for additionality with the need to ensure national development in a country like that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jonas. Thank you for the answer, and such a sharing is really valuable to all of us. Well, once again, I sincerely appreciate all the speakers today for preparing these speeches in your busy schedules. And these presentations are full of information and at the same time give us confidence about the market and bring more thoughts. Also, I would like to thank all of you for the company in the past 2 hours. It is your enthusiasm and support that makes hydrogen energy look dynamic. At the end of 2022, Connecting Green Hydrogen Europe looks forward to a prosperous 2023 with you together. If you have any content and event-related questions, feel free to contact us. Let's meet next time, Impact Live. Thank you. Bye-bye.